The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying insects as Captain Vera, Ghost, Nakamura, sorted through decades of classified reconnaissance files in the basement of Ramstein Air Base. The musty smell of old paper and forgotten secrets filled her nostrils as she methodically catalogued each document, her fingers moving with the precision of someone who had learned to find meaning in chaos. 3 months into this assignment, a punishment disguised as a promotion after the Kandahar incident, she had developed a rhythm. Open file, scan contents, input data, move to next box. It was mind-numbing work, designed to break the spirit of pilots who once owned the sky. But Ghost had always been different. Where others saw tedium, she found patterns. Where others grew restless, she grew focused. Her dark eyes, inheritance from a Japanese grandmother who had survived Hiroshima, caught details that others missed. Today, those details were screaming at her. 3 separate reconnaissance reports from 2019, filed under different classifications, all describing the same anomaly: an unidentified aircraft exhibiting flight characteristics that defied known physics. Vertical ascents at impossible speeds, instantaneous direction changes without deceleration, silent operation at supersonic velocities. The files had been buried, scattered across different departments, classified under obscure code names. Someone had wanted them forgotten, but Ghost remembered everything. Her eidetic memory, the same gift that had made her the youngest pilot to qualify for the experimental stealth program, was now connecting dots that were never meant to be connected. She cross-referenced the coordinates, matched the timestamps, overlaid the flight patterns. A chill ran down her spine as the truth crystallized before her eyes. 27 minutes later, the first alarm sounded. Not the base-wide klaxon that announced drills or genuine emergencies, but something else. A low, pulsing tone she had never heard before. Through the basement window, she watched ground crews scrambling with unusual urgency. Aircraft that had been scheduled for routine maintenance were being fueled and armed. Personnel were moving with the controlled panic of people who had just learned that something impossible was about to become very real. Ghost's secure terminal chimed softly. A new message, classified above her clearance level, had somehow found its way to her workstation. The sender was listed only as Blackbird 7. The message contained 2 words, "You know." Below it, coordinates that matched the pattern she had just discovered. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone, then stopped. Every communication on base was monitored, every keystroke logged. Whatever was happening, whoever Blackbird 7 was, they had chosen her for a reason. The basement suddenly felt less like a prison and more like the eye of a storm that was about to engulf everything she thought she knew about the world above. The second reconnaissance team had vanished over the Black Forest 18 hours ago. Colonel Marcus Thorne stood in the command center at Ramstein, watching satellite feeds that told him nothing and everything simultaneously. 2 F-16s, Carlson's Raven 1 and Raven 2, had been conducting a routine patrol when they reported contact with an unidentified aircraft. Then silence. Complete, total, terrifying silence. No distress calls, no emergency beacons, no debris signatures. Just empty sky where 2 of his best pilots and $50 million of aircraft had been moments before. "Sir, we've got movement in the archives," reported Technical Sergeant Williams, his voice carefully neutral. Captain Nakamura accessed files that shouldn't exist. Thorne's jaw tightened. Ghost. Of course it was her. The woman had a talent for finding things that were meant to stay lost. 3 months ago, she had been the most promising pilot in the experimental stealth program. Then Kandahar happened, and everything changed. The official report listed equipment malfunction and pilot error. The classified addendum told a different story, one that made seasoned intelligence officers wake up in cold sweats. "What files?" Thorne's voice carried the weight of someone who had spent 30 years learning that some questions had answers that could destroy you. Williams consulted his tablet, his face growing pale as he read. "Project Mirage files from 2019. 3 separate incidents, all previously compartmentalized. Sir, she's connected them." The colonel closed his eyes briefly. Mirage had been terminated for good reason. The things they had seen, the conclusions they had drawn, were too dangerous for daylight. Too dangerous for sanity. Get her up here, now. As Williams hurried away, Thorne turned back to the satellite display. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of radar and reason, something was hunting his aircraft. Something that had been content to remain hidden until Ghost started asking the right questions. He had read her psychological profile a dozen times. Brilliant, intuitive, dangerously curious. A pilot who saw patterns where others saw chaos, who could read the sky like a book written in languages that hadn't been invented yet. The elevator chimed softly as Ghost entered the command center. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to trust her instincts above all else, her flight suit pressed despite her months of desk duty. Thorne watched her take in the room, the tension, the encrypted communications, the satellite feeds showing empty sky. Her eyes, sharp as obsidian, missed nothing. "Captain Nakamura," he said formally, though they both knew formality was a luxury they could no longer afford. "Tell me about the files." She looked at him directly, unflinchingly. "Tell me about the missing aircraft, sir." They stared at each other across a gulf of classified truths and unspoken fears. Outside, another alarm began to sound. Ghost had always found comfort in the mathematics of flight. Thrust, drag, lift, weight, four forces that governed everything from sparrows to space shuttles. But the data streaming across her workstation defied every equation she had ever learned. The missing F-16s had been tracking something that appeared on radar intermittently, like a ghost materializing and vanishing at will. When it appeared, it showed impossible velocities. When it vanished, it did so instantaneously, without the gradual fade of conventional stealth technology. "This isn't stealth," she said to Colonel Thorne, her finger tracing the erratic blips on the radar replay. "Stealth absorbs or deflects electromagnetic waves. This is something else entirely." She paused the recording at 14:32:17, the moment before Raven 1's final transmission. The radar showed nothing, but the F-16's instruments had been screaming warnings about an object directly ahead. "It's selective visibility. Whatever this is, it chooses when to be seen." Thorne leaned over her shoulder, studying the data with the intensity of a man whose career, and possibly his life, depended on understanding the impossible. "The Mirage files you found. Walk me through them." Ghost pulled up the 3 reports she had discovered, her voice taking on the clinical tone of a pilot delivering a post-mission briefing. April 2019, Bavarian Alps. Civilian aircraft reported near collision with an object described as flowing like mercury. June 2019, North Sea. Royal Navy destroyer tracked an underwater contact moving at 300 knots. August 2019, Nevada Test Range. Satellite thermal imaging detected an object generating no heat signature while accelerating to Mach 4. She looked up at him, her expression grave. "Colonel, these aren't 3 separate incidents. They're 3 manifestations of the same technology. Something that can manipulate matter at the molecular level, alter its physical properties in real time. The reports were buried because someone realized that admitting this exists would fundamentally change everything we think we know about physics, about warfare, about the nature of reality itself." The command center had grown quiet around them. Other personnel were pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Ghost continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The flight patterns I've analyzed suggest intelligence, deliberate action. This isn't some natural phenomenon or experimental aircraft. It's learning, adapting, and now it's actively engaging our forces." Thorne's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. He read it twice before his face went completely white. "Captain," he said slowly, "we just lost contact with Search and Rescue Team Alpha. They were en route to the last known position of Raven flight." Ghost felt her blood turn to ice. Whatever was out there wasn't just hunting pilots anymore. It was eliminating anyone who got too close to the truth. The briefing room had been hastily converted into a crisis management center. Maps covered every available surface, marked with red pins indicating aircraft losses and black pins marking areas of anomalous activity. Ghost stood before an assembly of officers whose combined years of service exceeded the age of powered flight itself, and yet every face showed the same expression, the wide-eyed bewilderment of children who had just learned that monsters were real. 3 search and rescue helicopters. Gone. Major Patricia Chen, the base intelligence officer, spoke with the mechanical precision of someone fighting to maintain composure. No distress signals, no debris, no electromagnetic interference. They simply vanished from all tracking systems simultaneously at 15:47 local time. She gestured to a map where 3 blue X's marked the last known positions. Whatever we're dealing with has escalated from observation to active engagement. General Harrison, who had flown in from EUCOM headquarters, looked like a man who had aged 10 years in the past 10 hours. Captain Nakamura, your analysis of the Mirage files suggests we're dealing with technology beyond our current understanding. I need you to make this simple for us. What exactly are we facing? Ghost approached the tactical display, her movements deliberate despite the eyes of 20 senior officers boring into her back. She had spent her career being underestimated, dismissed as too young, too ethnic, too female for the old boys club of military aviation. Now their careers, their lives depended on her expertise. Gentlemen, we're dealing with something that can exist in multiple states simultaneously, she began, using a laser pointer to highlight specific data points. Solid enough to appear on radar when it chooses, intangible enough to pass through matter when necessary, fast enough to outrun our fastest interceptors, yet capable of hovering motionless for hours. The technology suggests matter manipulation at the quantum level, the ability to alter the fundamental properties of materials in real time. Colonel Rivers, a veteran pilot with more combat hours than most squadrons combined, interrupted with barely concealed skepticism. Captain, you're describing science fiction. Are you seriously suggesting we're facing some kind of alien technology? The room fell silent. It was the question everyone had been thinking, but no one had dared voice. Ghost met his gaze steadily, her voice calm despite the magnitude of what she was about to say. Sir, I'm suggesting we're facing technology that appears to operate outside the known laws of physics. Whether that technology is of terrestrial or extraterrestrial origin is currently irrelevant. What matters is that it's here, it's hostile, and our conventional weapons and tactics appear to be completely ineffective against it. She paused, letting the implications sink in. We need to fundamentally rethink our approach to this threat, or we're going to lose more good people. The weight of those words settled over the room like a burial shroud. The flight line at Ramstein had never been quieter. Aircraft sat in perfect rows like sleeping giants, their crews maintaining them with the obsessive care of people who needed something, anything, to keep their hands busy while their minds grappled with the impossible. Ghost walked among them, her footsteps echoing off the concrete, drawing stares from ground crews who had heard the rumors but didn't quite believe them yet. She stopped beside her old aircraft, a modified F-22 Raptor designated Whisper 7. 3 months of desk duty hadn't dulled her eye for detail. She could see that the maintenance logs showed weekly engine runs, weekly systems checks, weekly preparations for a pilot who wasn't cleared to fly. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez approached, his weathered face showing the careful neutrality of a senior NCO who had learned when to speak and when to listen. "She's ready, Captain," he said simply. "Been keeping her ready." Ghost ran her hand along the aircraft's wing, feeling the subtle vibrations that indicated perfectly tuned engines. Rodriguez had been her crew chief for 2 years before Kandahar, had worked miracles to keep her aircraft mission-capable through the worst conditions imaginable. "Chief, what have you heard about the missing aircraft?" She knew Rodriguez had sources throughout the base, informal networks that often carried more accurate information than official channels. His expression darkened. "Heard enough to know that whatever took down those birds wasn't conventional. Heard enough to know that the brass is scared." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "Also heard that you're the only pilot on base who's ever encountered something like this before." Ghost's blood went cold. The Kandahar incident was classified at levels that should have made it invisible to everyone except those directly involved. If Rodriguez knew, others did too. "Who's talking, Chief?" Rodriguez shook his head slowly. "Nobody's talking, Captain. That's the problem. When nobody talks about something that should be front-page news, that tells you everything you need to know." He handed her a flight helmet, custom-fitted and bearing her call sign in worn lettering. "They're going to need you up there. Whatever this thing is, conventional tactics aren't working. Maybe it's time to try unconventional ones." Ghost held the helmet, feeling its familiar weight. 6 months ago, she had been the Air Force's rising star, the pilot chosen to test experimental stealth technology that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Then came the mission over Kandahar, the encounter that had ended her flying career and launched 1,000 classified reports. She had seen something that night, something that had tracked her through stealth systems designed to be undetectable. Something that had played with her, tested her, then vanished like morning mist. "Captain," Rodriguez said quietly, "whatever happened over Afghanistan, whatever you saw, it's happening again, isn't it?" She looked at him, this man who had kept her aircraft flying through sand and heat and enemy fire, and nodded slowly. The truth was too big to contain any longer. "Yeah, Chief, it's happening again." In the secure communications center, buried 3 levels beneath Ramstein, encrypted messages were arriving from locations around the globe. Each report told the same impossible story. Unidentified aircraft exhibiting flight characteristics that defied known physics, disappearing military assets, and radar operators who swore they were tracking ghosts. Ghost studied the global pattern emerging on the tactical display. Her pilot's mind automatically calculating vectors and intercept courses for objects that apparently didn't need to follow the rules of aerodynamics. "Ankara reported losing 2 F-16s over the Aegean," reported Captain Morrison, the night shift communications officer. His voice carried the strain of someone who had been fielding impossible reports for 12 straight hours. "Same signature as our losses. Radar contact, then nothing." Ghost traced the flight paths on the map, noting the subtle patterns that others had missed. The encounters weren't random. There was methodology, purpose, intelligence behind the attacks. "They're testing us," she said to Colonel Thorne, who had remained in the command center despite General Harrison's order to get some rest. "Each engagement follows the same pattern. Initial contact to assess our response capabilities, then systematic elimination of our aircraft. It's gathering intelligence on our tactics, our technology, our limitations." She highlighted specific data points on the tactical display. "Notice the timing. Each subsequent encounter begins exactly 47 minutes after the previous one ends. That's not coincidence. That's data processing time." Thorne rubbed his eyes, trying to process implications that challenged everything he had learned in 30 years of military service. "If you're right, then we're not just facing superior technology. We're facing superior intelligence, something that can analyze our capabilities and adapt its tactics in real time." The weight of command had aged him visibly in the past 24 hours. What happened over Kandahar, Ghost? The real story, not the sanitized version in your official report. Ghost looked around the communications center, nodding the personnel who had stopped pretending they weren't listening. These were good people, professionals who deserved to know what they were facing. "I was testing the X-44 stealth demonstrator, pushing its capabilities in actual combat conditions. During the return flight, something began packing me. Not following, packing. Matching my speed, my altitude, my heading changes with impossible precision. My radar showed nothing, but I could see it. A shape that seemed to bend light around itself, like heat shimmer given form." She paused, remembering the fear that had gripped her that night, the absolute certainty that she was being hunted by something beyond her understanding. "It stayed with me for 27 minutes, long enough to scan every system on my aircraft, to map every electromagnetic signature, to learn everything about our most advanced stealth technology. Then it accelerated straight up and vanished, leaving no trace except the memory of something that should not exist." The communications center had grown absolutely quiet. Even the electronic hum of equipment seemed muted, as if the machines themselves were listening. The official report blamed equipment malfunction because the alternative was too dangerous to acknowledge. But the truth is, something intercepted our most advanced stealth aircraft, studied it, and let me live to deliver the information. The question is why? A new alarm began to sound, different from any they had heard before. The alert came from NORAD's Cheyenne Mountain facility at 03:47 GMT. Massive electromagnetic disturbance detected over the North Atlantic, moving at impossible speed toward European airspace. Ghost stood in the command center watching radar displays that showed nothing while electromagnetic sensors screamed warnings about something that shouldn't exist. The contradiction was maddening. Instruments detecting the presence of something that remained completely invisible to their most sophisticated tracking systems. Estimated time to European airspace, 47 minutes, reported the radar controller, his voice tight with controlled panic. Ghost felt a chill of recognition. 47 minutes, the same interval between previous encounters. Whatever was coming had been timing its approach since the moment their aircraft had gone missing. All NATO air forces have been notified. Interceptor squadrons are scrambling from bases across Europe. General Harrison, who had returned to the command center despite his exhaustion, stood before a wall-mounted display showing the positions of Allied aircraft. Dozens of fighter jets were racing toward intercept positions, their pilots unaware they were about to face something that had already analyzed and defeated their best technology. "This is exactly what it wants," Ghost said, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos. "We're responding predictably, sending our aircraft into a trap." "Captain, those are NATO pilots out there," Harrison replied sharply. "We can't just leave them to face this thing alone." Ghost moved to the tactical display, her fingers dancing across the controls to overlay her analysis of previous encounters. "General, we're not helping them by sending more aircraft to be destroyed. Look at the pattern. Every time we respond conventionally, we lose everything we commit. This thing isn't just hunting our aircraft, it's studying our response protocols." The electromagnetic readings were intensifying, creating interference patterns that threatened to overwhelm their detection systems. Through the static, flight controllers were receiving increasingly frantic communications from interceptor squadrons reporting contact with something that defied description. "Viper 1 to control, I have visual on." "Jesus Christ, what is that thing?" The transmission dissolved into static, followed by the electronic tone that indicated loss of telemetry. "Viper 1, respond," the controller called repeatedly, his professional composure cracking. "Viper Flight, any station, respond." Only silence answered, the kind of absolute quiet that preceded tragedy. Ghost watched the tactical display as one by one, the symbols representing Allied aircraft began disappearing. Not destroyed, simply gone, as if they had never existed. "It's not just taking our aircraft anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's erasing them." The implications were staggering. Something with the power to remove matter from existence, to rewrite reality itself. The electromagnetic disturbance was moving steadily closer to Ramstein, and she knew with absolute certainty that conventional defenses would be useless. "General," she said, turning to face Harrison, "I need to get airborne." The argument raged for 17 minutes while aircraft continued to vanish from European skies. General Harrison paced the length of the command center, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, anger, and desperate calculation. "Captain, you are not cleared for flight status. After Kandahar, the Psychological Evaluation Board specifically recommended against." Ghost interrupted him, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had stared into the abyss and survived. "Sir, the Psychological Evaluation Board recommended against flight status because I reported contact with something that their models said couldn't exist. 3 months later, that same something is systematically destroying NATO air assets." She gestured to the tactical display, where red X's marked the positions of 23 missing aircraft. "How's their psychological model looking now?" Colonel Thorne stepped between them, his expression grim. General, she's the only pilot who's encountered this thing and lived. She's also the only pilot who's flown the X-44 stealth demonstrator under combat conditions. If there's any technology in our inventory that might be effective against this threat, it's that aircraft. Harrison stopped packing. His attention focused on the secure communications terminal where reports were streaming in from bases across Europe. "The French have lost an entire squadron," he said quietly. "The Germans are reporting electromagnetic interference so severe it's affecting civilian aircraft. Whatever this thing is, it's not just hunting military targets anymore. It's disrupting everything." He looked at Ghost with the expression of a man who had run out of conventional options. "What makes you think you can succeed where everyone else has failed?" Ghost moved to her workstation, pulling up the classified files from her encounter over Kandahar. The data she had been forbidden to discuss, the readings that had been buried in black programs so deep they didn't officially exist. "Because it let me live, sir. In 27 minutes of contact, it could have destroyed my aircraft 1,000 times over. Instead, it studied me, learned from me. The question is whether I learned anything from it." She highlighted specific electromagnetic signatures from her encounter, patterns that had seemed random at the time but now revealed themselves as something more deliberate. "I think it was communicating, not with words or radio signals, but with electromagnetic patterns that modulated my aircraft's systems. If I'm right, then this isn't just an attack, it's an attempt at contact. We've been responding to a first contact scenario with military force, which may be exactly the wrong approach." The silence stretched for 10 seconds before General Harrison spoke. "Captain, you're asking me to authorize a pilot who's been grounded for psychological reasons to fly an experimental aircraft against an unknown threat based on a theory that this is some kind of diplomatic mission?" Ghost met his gaze steadily. "Sir, I'm asking you to let me try a different approach before we lose every aircraft in European airspace." He looked at the tactical display, then at the faces of his staff officers, then back at her. "Prep the X-44. You launch in 30 minutes." Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez worked with the focused intensity of a man who knew his pilot's life depended on every connection, every system check, every detail being perfect. The X-44 sat in its classified hangar like a sleeping predator, its angular surfaces designed to bend electromagnetic waves away from enemy sensors. Ghost ran through her pre-flight inspection with methodical precision, her hands remembering systems she hadn't touched in 3 months. "All stealth systems check good," Rodriguez reported, his voice echoing in the vast hangar. "Electromagnetic countermeasures are online. Adaptive camouflage is responding normally." He paused at the weapons control panel, his expression troubled. "Captain, what good are missiles going to do against something that can exist in multiple states simultaneously?" It was a good question, one that had been keeping her awake since the first aircraft disappeared. "Maybe none," she admitted, strapping herself into the pilot's seat. "But I'm not planning to fight it, I'm planning to talk to it." Rodriguez looked at her as if she had announced her intention to have tea with the devil. "Talk to it, Captain, that thing has killed dozens of our people." Ghost began the engine start sequence, feeling the familiar vibration as the aircraft's systems came online. "Chief, what if they're not dead? What if they're just somewhere else?" The thought had been growing in her mind as she analyzed the electromagnetic signatures from each disappearance. No debris, no explosion signatures, no distress calls, just instantaneous removal from all tracking systems. Either they were dealing with a weapon that could disintegrate matter completely, or they were dealing with something that could relocate it. The electromagnetic patterns from Kandahar suggested the second possibility. "Ghost, this is Control. You are cleared for immediate departure. Vector 47, climb to flight level 350. The voice belonged to Colonel Thorne, who had taken personal responsibility for her mission authorization. "Electromagnetic disturbance is now 70 nautical miles from your position and closing. All other aircraft have been cleared from the engagement zone." Ghost advanced the throttles, feeling the familiar surge of acceleration as the X-44 left its hangar and climbed into the night sky. The stars were brilliant above the cloud layer, sharp points of light that reminded her why she had become a pilot in the first place. The sky had always been her sanctuary, the place where mathematics and physics created a realm of perfect order. Tonight, that order was about to be tested by something that operated outside all known rules. Control Ghost. I'm at flight level 350, heading 47. No visual contact yet, but electromagnetic readings are increasing. The X-44's sensors were detecting interference patterns that grew stronger with each passing mile. Whatever was out there, it was big, and it was actively manipulating the electromagnetic spectrum in ways that should have been impossible. Copy, Ghost. You are now entering the engagement zone. Good hunting. She almost smiled at the traditional fighter pilot send-off. Tonight, she wasn't hunting anything. Tonight, she was going to try something that had never been attempted in the history of military aviation. She was going to attempt first contact. The electromagnetic storm hit her aircraft like a physical blow, sending instrument readings into chaotic spikes and filling her headset with static that sounded almost like voices. Ghost fought to maintain control as the X-44 bucked and rolled through turbulence that shouldn't exist in clear sky. Her heads-up display flickered between normal operation and complete failure, while warning lights illuminated her cockpit in an ominous red glow. Control, Ghost. I'm experiencing severe electromagnetic interference. All navigation systems are compromised. She tried to keep her voice steady despite the fear that was threatening to overwhelm her training. This was worse than Kandahar, worse than anything in her experience. The interference wasn't random, it was structured, purposeful, like someone was probing her aircraft's systems from the inside. Ghost Control, we're losing your telemetry. Can you maintain course? Thorne's voice was barely audible through the static, but she could hear the concern underneath his professional calm. She checked her backup instruments, trying to maintain orientation as the storm of electromagnetic energy continued to assault her senses. Then, through the chaos, she saw it. A shape in the darkness ahead, visible only as a distortion in the starlight. Not solid, not entirely present, but undeniably there. It moved with fluid grace, sliding through the air without regard for the physical laws that bound her aircraft. As she watched, it began to change, its form shifting like liquid mercury, becoming more defined, more purposeful. It was beautiful and terrifying, a manifestation of physics that existed beyond human understanding. Contact, she whispered into her radio, knowing the words would probably never reach the ground through the electromagnetic storm. I have visual contact. The entity, she could no longer think of it as merely an aircraft, began to pace her flight path, matching her speed and altitude with impossible precision. Just like over Kandahar, but this time she was ready. Her hands moved to the communications panel, switching to the emergency frequency that NATO had designated for first contact scenarios, a frequency that had been established as a theoretical exercise and never used in practice. Unknown aircraft, this is Captain Vera Nakamura, United States Air Force. I am not hostile. Please respond. The static in her headset seemed to shift, becoming more organized, more purposeful. Then, impossibly, she heard her own voice coming back through the radio. Captain Vera Nakamura, United States Air Force. I am not hostile. But it wasn't just a recording. The inflection was wrong, the cadence altered, as if something was learning to speak by analyzing her vocal patterns in real time. Control, Ghost, she transmitted, hoping someone could hear her through the interference. I think it's trying to communicate. The voice that came through her headset was her own, but transformed, layered with harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce, modulated in ways that suggested vast intelligence operating through unfamiliar mechanisms. Vera Nakamura, Ghost, we have been watching, learning. Your species responds to unknown stimuli with violence. This creates difficulty in establishing communication protocols. Ghost felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she processed the implications. This entity had been studying them, trying to make contact, and their military response had been interpreted as hostility. "Are you responsible for the missing aircraft?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "The missing pilots." Missing is inaccurate terminology, relocated for preservation during hostile actions. Your species displays concerning tendency towards self-destruction when encountering paradigm-shifting phenomena. The electromagnetic interference was lessening, as if the entity was learning to modulate its communication to avoid damaging her systems. "We attempted passive observation. Your aircraft designated Whisper 7 was first to detect our presence. You demonstrated curiosity rather than aggression. This was noted." The realization hit her like a physical blow. The encounter over Kandahar hadn't been random. She had been selected, chosen as a potential point of contact because she had responded differently than other pilots might have. "You've been trying to communicate for months," she said, understanding flooding through her. "The electromagnetic signatures, the flight patterns, you've been sending messages that we interpreted as threats." Correct assessment. Your military leadership categorized our communication attempts as hostile actions. This necessitated defensive measures to prevent escalation. The entity's form was becoming more stable, more defined, as if the successful communication was allowing it to exist more fully in her reality. "We require dialogue. Your species has reached technological threshold that creates mutual risk. Guidance is necessary." Ghost looked at her instruments, nodding that her radio was somehow penetrating the electromagnetic interference that had previously blocked all communication. "Control, Ghost. Are you receiving this transmission?" After a moment of static, Colonel Thorne's voice came through clearly. "Ghost, Control. We're receiving everything. Continue communication protocols." She took a deep breath, realizing that she was about to become the first human being to engage in formal diplomatic contact with a non-human intelligence. "What kind of guidance? What do you want from us?" "Survival," came the response, "for both our species." The next 17 minutes of radio conversation would be studied by linguists, physicists, and philosophers for decades to come. Ghost found herself serving as humanity's first ambassador to an intelligence that described itself as existing across multiple dimensions simultaneously, capable of manipulating matter and energy in ways that human science was only beginning to theorize. The missing pilots and aircraft, she learned, had been transported to what the entity called a preservation matrix, a space outside normal reality where they waited, unharmed, while their rescuer attempted to establish peaceful contact. "Your species stands at critical juncture," the entity explained, its borrowed voice becoming more fluent with each exchange. "Technological advancement without corresponding wisdom development leads to self-extinction. We have observed this pattern among 47 civilizations. 31 did not survive the transition period." Ghost felt a chill that had nothing to do with the altitude. "You're saying we're in danger of destroying ourselves." Affirmative assessment. Your military technologies advance exponentially while your conflict resolution capabilities remain primitive. Within 12 Earth years, probability models indicate 73% chance of civilization-ending warfare. The entity's form shifted, becoming more geometric, more structured, as if it was trying to present information in a way her human mind could process. "Intervention protocols require consent from representative sample of your species. You have been selected as initial contact." Through her radio, she could hear frantic conversations in the background at Ramstein. Generals and politicians were being awakened. Secure phone lines were lighting up across 2 continents, and somewhere in a bunker beneath Washington, D.C., people were realizing that the world had just changed forever. "Why me?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "You demonstrated appropriate balance of caution and curiosity during initial contact. Your psychological profile indicates capability for paradigm adaptation. Your professional competence creates credibility among your military hierarchy." The entity paused, and when it continued, something that might have been humor colored its synthesized voice. "Also, your flight skills are adequate. for survival in dimensional boundary conditions. Ghost almost laughed despite the magnitude of the situation. Even alien intelligences, it seemed, could deliver backhanded compliments. What happens now? What do you need from us? The electromagnetic interference was continuing to diminish, allowing clearer communication not just with the entity but with ground control. She could hear Colonel Thorne coordinating with authorities she didn't even know existed, establishing protocols for a situation that no one had ever seriously expected to encounter. Immediate requirement: cessation of hostile military responses to our presence. Long-term requirement: establishment of formal communication protocols between our species. Your leaders must be made to understand that cooperation, not conflict, determines survival probability. The entity's form was becoming increasingly solid, as if the successful communication was allowing it to exist more fully in human reality. "Control, Ghost," she transmitted to Ramstein. "Are you getting all this? Do I have authorization to continue negotiations?" The pause that followed seemed to last forever before General Harrison's voice came through the radio. "Ghost Control, you have full authorization. You are now acting as official representative of Earth." The weight of those words settled over her like a lead blanket. In the space of a few hours, she had gone from cataloging old files in a basement to serving as humanity's first interstellar diplomat. The entity seemed to sense her emotional state, its voice taking on what might have been a reassuring tone. The transition period is always difficult for emerging civilizations. Success requires individuals capable of transcending established paradigms. You have demonstrated this capability. She looked out at the stars, suddenly aware that she was no longer alone among them. "When do we meet the others, the missing pilots?" "Soon. First, your leadership must demonstrate commitment to peaceful resolution. Then we begin the real work." The landing at Ramstein took place under unprecedented security conditions. Aircraft from 6 nations formed a protective corridor as Ghost brought the X-44 home, while electromagnetic monitoring stations tracked the entity that followed at a discreet distance. The media had been given a cover story about advanced military exercises, but Ghost could see the signs of barely controlled panic in the faces of the personnel who lined the flight line. Word was spreading despite all attempts at classification. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting beside her aircraft as she taxied into the hangar, his